Okay, here we go again.
Okay.
So yeah, there's so many things I think that you know you talk about. You've talked about the area, the hauntings, the local folklore, and I'm not exactly sure where you're located. And I've heard the Meadow area is an undisclosed location, which I understand.
Right.
Because I wrote well, my friend Dr. Greg Little, who helps me with my magazine Alternate Perceptions. He's acted as a publisher and co-editor and a columnist. And he wrote a book a few years ago, an illustrated volume called Native American Mounds in Alabama.
Hmm.
And some of his material was from a Dr. Harry Hallstein of the Jacksonville State University.
Hmm.
And a lot of impressive Native American sites. A lot of them are in stone. There's a huge stone effigy of like a snake.
Yep.
And,
Yep.
and there's also all these walls, and there's these on top of these mountains, there's like prayer circles, is what they assume they are. And so I'm wondering if maybe where the meadow is, if you've noticed native sites around those areas. Apparently, there's quite a few. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. America's Southland is just absolutely riddled, with Native American site. Many that have been discovered,
mhm.
and many that have not. Some are quite remarkable. You mentioned, Dr. Holstein. There's a set of mounds in a place called Moundville, Alabama. They're these huge
Mhm.
earthen structures, and the real nature of those aren't completely understood exactly what they're for. In Georgia, you have a remarkable effigy called Rock Eagle, the Rock Eagle effigy, which is amazing. And then there's all kinds of Blood Mountain, Georgia. There's carvings up on top of the mountain there on Blood Mountain and things like that. The Southland is so rich of Native American and First Nation folklore. And in the first part of my book, I started really researching this because I sat down during COVID, like a lot of people, and had some time to ponder. And I started researching, and I started finding out that this region, I'm talking about a dual state region that actually encompasses two parts of two separate states, is super rich in high strangeness. And I'm talking about everything from UFOs to ghosts, cryptids, strange happenings, just all of the various organizations that collect this data, have information about this region. And then I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to start kind of drilling down, go from macro to micro. This is the two states area. This is the counties around this nature preserve. This is the county that the nature preserve is, and then down into the actual preserve itself. And during my research, I started finding a lot of southern Native American folklore, which strangely mimics some of the Western Native American folklore. Like they have the Skinwalker. Here in the South, we have something called the Spear Finger Witch, which would eat your soul. That was an evil shaman, female shaman. They had the Stone Coat Giants, which were like cryptid type creatures that the arrows would bounce off of. And it was as though they were wearing stone coats. And many, many other strange creatures and folklore, both in Cherokee and Creek and other Native American tribes in the American Southland. So it's an area that I stumbled in this. Thought, oh, I've discovered something new. Well, and on the contrary, is I am just maybe rediscovering something that's existed for very long, and I'm looking at it through my Western European eyes, trying to make sense of it. But it's something that people have been experiencing for perhaps thousands of years.
Yeah, that's what I've found in digging into uh, some of the ancient history, the shamanism, the stories and folklore, and it's like um, I get excited and then I realize I'm simply rediscovering what
Right.
a lot of these ancient people were already in some way familiar with. It's pretty mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's
uh,
it's actually kind of humbling because you think, oh, I'm just Mr. Smarty Pants, and look at what I found. And you're like, yeah, no, I'm not. I'm just rehashing, something these folks have been experiencing for generations.
Yeah. Well, when I got in the field at age 14 and 67, I thought, yeah, I read A Flying Saucer Serious Business by Frank Edwards, and it was strictly mainstream ET, nuts
Yeah.
and bolts. And that's where my whole focus was. And then, reading and corresponding with John Keel and becoming familiar with his ideas, and then Jacques Vallée and Brad Steiger.
Mm-hmm.
And, it opened up a whole new perspective. It included all these things. I mean, it's where
Well,
you've got
it's strange you should mention that, because right here I've got Gods of Aquarius and Our Haunted Planet,
yes,
by the two gentlemen you just mentioned.
yeah. Brad Steiger, one of the first contactees I ever interviewed was back in August of 1971. It was because of Brad Steiger book, The Aquarian Revelations. I don't think it's available now, but at the time, he was talking about a couple of Canadian women who were having experiences, and he had met with them and seen some strange lights, and apparently there were physical reactions to them, and furthermore, there was a particular woman up in Toronto, Canada, that he mentioned, and we were fixing to have a family vacation, so I managed to talk my father into driving 600 miles from Maine up into Toronto so I could meet this lady.
Just a side trip.
So yeah, that was the beginning, of delving into those kind of stories, and it's been quite a journey, to say the least. And
you mentioned Brad Steiger, and there's actually a quote I wrote down before this interview, which it really. This is out of his Blue Book Files Revealed of 1977. It's a quote from it, and it just really ties it all together for me. It says, quote, "We are dealing with multiple dimensional parapsychological phenomena that is largely indigenous to the planet Earth. This is not something new, and these sites of high strangeness have always been there."
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just thought that was mind blowing. When I read that, like I said, I thought I was, the Magellan of the, parapsychological world finding this place, and when in fact, not so much.
Well, Brad Steiger wrote, I'd say, thousands of articles and nearly 200 books in his lifetime, and he told me that it was actually when he met John Keel back in the 60s, and Keel was telling him about the Men in Black, his theories that and the psychic elements, that he really that's where his course changed, and he began to think, well, that's pretty much where I need to look at too. And he did, and traveled around and came up with the same things. You can I know an excellent investigator, Bob Pratt, who was a complete skeptic, and I got a cat that just joined me on the couch. Anyway, he had actually been involved in investigating reports for the National Enquirer, and he thought he was going to, investigate these stories for him, and he's going to find explanations for these sightings. And the very first one he encountered was out in Michigan, and there was multiple witnesses. It was tracked on radar. There was no way he could explain this, and so he was suddenly a convert. Before that, he worked for a newspaper somewhere in Virginia, he said, for about 7 years, and every time a UFO story came over the teletype, he crumbled it up and put it in the wastepaper basket. He thought it was all nonsense.
Yeah.
But he came across like the Colares incident. He was so impressed with, that was in Brazil, this island of Colares at the mouth of the Amazon. There were, I think, a little over 36 people who were back in 77, 78, who were zapped by rays from these craft. The military was there. Journalists were there photographing these things. They had hundreds of photographs. They had video. It was this was high strangeness, and yet he was so caught up in the physical dimensions of this and the idea of craft, and injury cases and
Right.
so on, that he didn't look at the psychic aspects himself for a good while. It was a case I was talking with him about up in Liberty, Kentucky in 1976, where these three women were abducted together, and they had all these strange psychic experiences going on afterwards. And that was when he realized, oh, there's a psychic dimension to this.
It's really cool that you mentioned the Brazil case because, in my research, I started, looking at cubes, boxes, and
Mm-hmm.
it became really interesting that in Brazil, there were reports of flying boxes. They called them chupas that would zap people, flying
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
cubes, and so I started, doing a little bit more research and I, started researching, Skinwalker Ranch. And out there, they also saw what they described as flying refrigerators, big boxes with lights blinking on them. And before this cube was filmed by us, is it was picked up on the FLIR before they had started recording with blinking lights. So I attended the UFO Mega Conference in Laughlin last year or the year before, and I met Katie Grabowski there. And she was heavily involved in the Elbert County, Colorado ranch incident. And when she saw me, she said, "Are you Trey Hudson? I want to talk to you." And I'm like, "Sure. What's up?" She goes, "We had the same experiences with boxes on the ranch." And she actually was able to get a copy, an unredacted copy of the report by John Durr and Leo Sprinkle that really digs down into this stuff. And there were numerous cases of boxes or cubes. So there's something about the archetype of a box or cube. And you mentioned Brazil, and it made me, think about this whole cube thing. And for the life of me, I can't figure out what it is about boxes. And Katie has actually come down to the meadow and researched with us. She has seen anomalous lights. One of her traveling companions was actually touched by an unseen force. She's seen figures running around the periphery of the meadow where we had no team members. So this phenomena, is exposing itself to different people, and it's evolving. That's the weird thing about it is now we have hitchhikers following us home and strange things happening in our houses, which ties right into some of the stuff that Mr. Keel talked about and others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. The poltergeist
Right.
manifestations. And, that was something that was taboo, but he encountered that in particular. I remember around Point Pleasant, West Virginia, back in the 60s.
Mhm.
And I, when I was in the Navy, my my ship, a destroyer escort, became home ported at Mayport, Florida, naval base there. And there was a lady that I'd corresponded with a couple of years before going into the Navy, Ramona Clark. And she was a researcher, but also an experiencer. That's why she got in the field. In July of 1967, just right off the base, her husband, who was a Navy man, had they had seen this one evening. They were out riding around, and they were near the Coast Guard station, and they thought this was a plane coming for a landing. In fact, there were like two cars in front of them, and they all thought, we'll wait here and let this plane come in. Except then they suddenly realized it wasn't a plane, and the two cars screeched ahead of them, burning rubber, and went down at high speed and left the area. And so they just kept watching, and it was sort of a disc-shaped object, about 40 feet in diameter, with a dome on top, metal gray color appearance, and it was kind of rocking like a boat in water.
Mm-hmm.
And it was right ahead of them, and then it just kind of went down the road, came to a crossroads, and it just sort of waited there to see which way they were going to go. And they turned left. They, at the time they lived in a trailer close to the base, and her 13-year-old son was in the back, and he rolled down the window and was looking out, and she got scared. He was saying he was seeing some lights under the thing. They hadn't seen lights when they saw it from the side. And it just hovered there. The car looked like it was going to kind of stall out the battery. The lights turned kind of yellowish and started to retract.
Mm-hmm.
And then it moved off. And as it did, the power came back, and the object went over, I think, the Coast Guard station. They could hear somebody yelling over a speaker, and then these two jet interceptors, apparently from Jacksonville Naval Air Station, came flying in. She said it looked like they were trying to. One was kind of on one side, one on the other. They were trying to come in at it from different sides, and all of a sudden it just turned like a hot piece of coal and shot out over the ocean and left them like they were standing still.
Right.
And within 3 or 4 days after that, their home erupted with poltergeist activity. There were sounds of footsteps, a voice calling her name, always on the left side, and eventually seeing balls of light in the house and the bedroom, usually around 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, yeah.
And they then seeing figures like, one was like, at first it looked like a former husband of hers, and then it changed into this cat-like face, and it was just over her,
Right.
and then her son, the 13-year-old, started coming into her room saying there were lights and balls of light and people in his room, and they were very scary. And so, and so she actually wrote to John Keel and was seeking his advice, and and so that's how I really became aware and involved in that whole thing. And I learned from her.
Yeah, and we've experienced that too. One of my team members actually had orbs form in her home, and she has this on film, which is kind of cool. And they were so distinct that her young 3-year-old son is pointing up at the ceiling at this orb, and on the video you can hear him going ball, ball, because he sees a ball floating around. And we've had people's vehicles completely die on the way home after our expeditions, and I've had things disappear and then reappear, at my home. And so there's something about this phenomena that seems to follow you home. And the people that have been researching out of Skinwalker Ranch, I don't know if you had a chance to read the book, Skinwalkers of the Pentagon.
I have,
is they talk about the hitchhiker phenomenon. And it's like, doggone, here we are experiencing the same thing. And what's interesting about it, and you made me think of something, is perspective. And that was something that John Keel specifically was so good at, is he was careful not to label things and put them in a particular box. He was recounting the experience. He was very much of an experiential kind of guy. And, a ghost researcher, a paranormal, would say, well, these are ghosts. This is dead Uncle Fred. The figures that we saw on our FLIR, a cryptid researcher, well, that's a Bigfoot. A ufologist would say, well, those are obviously alien grays from, some sort of technical craft. And what if it's all of them and none of them? And I think that's where we're at.
Yeah, I've been saying for some time now myself that if we could just get all these people from these different disciplines together. I mean, an anthropologist, a folklorist, they look at all this stuff, and they look at the people consciousness, they look at the stories themselves. They may not come to the right conclusion, but I mean, you've got to be able to, we should be able to talk to the cryptologist, tell them what we're finding, listen to what they have to say. The ghost hunters, the parapsychologists. I've just read a book, The PK Man, by a well-known PhD parapsychologist, Jeffrey Mishlove, and all the stories that he compiled on this one individual who was actually contacting the Stanford Research Institute.
SRI.
Yeah, they dropped it in their lap because they had enough controversial people like Uri Geller. So they said, we got this guy named Ted Owens, and he predicts things, and he's right. And they wrote to him from SRI and said, very good prediction. And he wrote back and said, I'm not predicting, I'm causing these things, because
Yeah.
he claimed that he felt like he was an ambassador to the space people, and he would have all these, even wrote to U.S. presidents about things that were
Hmm.
putting their lives in danger, and his predictions came true. So I mean, there are some people who interact, and the phenomena, well, creates a frame of reference, as Keel called it.
Right.
And this Ted Owens, he apparently had multiple talents. He was a really a genius IQ. He was a member of Mensa, and he had been in World War II. He actually worked with Dr. Ryan and his wife at Duke University.
Hmm.
Um, but he was also became well, we'd call him a contactee. I wrote to him in 1971, and I said, I hear you're quite an extraordinary contactee. And he wrote back, I'm not a contactee. I'm one who actually, I'm a unique individual here,
Right.
And he was, at the time, he sounded kind of braggadocious to me. But then
Right.
after I've seen what Dr. Mishlove and D. Scott Rogo had researched about him and
Hmm.
others, turned out to be a pretty impressive case. So you never know.
Well, and you're talking about people like Rogo and Klein, Sorat and Rogo stuff.
Hmm.
Is you start seeing once again the parapsychological bleeding over, into some of this other experiences. And thinking about that, and like I said, I studied under Bill Roll, and I actually went to a private gathering with Rogo, and I think he wrote "Phone Calls from the Dead," if I'm not mistaken, was one of his.
Yes, yes, he
And
did. Yeah.
we were had a chance to discuss that phenomena, and so I started thinking as a kind of a paranormal guy, parapsychologist guy, what can I bring to the table? What is a tool that I have in my toolbox to look at this phenomena? And we decided to use something called the Estes Protocol. And I don't know if you're familiar with that. Uh,
Mm.
okay, on the TV shows and stuff. I'm sure you've seen ghost boxes, which are a hacked AM radio that
Oh,
frequency hops. You ask a question,
I've,
it gets.
I've got one.
Yeah,
I've,
so but it's very subjective. Who is this? Well, I heard Uncle Fred. So okay, it's Uncle Fred because Uncle Fred died last year, so they must have said Uncle Fred. But the Estes protocol is it goes another step. Is you take a ghost box, you put sound canceling earbuds in a person that's designated as a receiver. You blindfold them. You put shooting muffs over their ears so they have no relation to the outside world. They have no stimulus at all. And you have somebody that asks questions. And their idea or their instructions are whatever you hear come through the ghost boxes is an intelligible word. You just repeat that word out loud. So if you hear rutabaga, you just say rutabaga. Or orange, you say orange, or whatever, Buick, Buick. And so we actually went out into the meadow and did the Estes protocol and entered into what I believe was a two-way communications with an entity. And once it was really interesting, we have this on film, and the transcript of it is in my book. Is when we started trying to peg different phenomenologies on what was causing the cubes, electromagnetism, microgravities, singularities, things like that. Is the entity that we were communicating became very, very agitated. And something I didn't realize until later, I didn't pick up on it while I was doing the session, is one word was uttered that didn't seem important at the time, but the more I thought about it, the more significant it became. And that word was cold. Now, where have we heard the name cold before?
well, Keel, of course, yes.
Indrid Cold. And if you're familiar with
Yeah.
some of the work with some of the Heller experiments, Indrid Cold once again comes into play there. So is cold or Indrid Cold, is that an archetype of these entities? That's just a label that they use, and was the individual that responded with cold during this SD session. Is that
Yeah.
what he was referring to?
I will. Now I've used the Ghost Box actually for a little over a decade now. For a while, I was obsessed with it. I've kind of backed off because there's a lot of other things to do. But it was a contactee, well, an abductee, psychic. Saw his first ghost at age 5 and alien at age 5, and he showed me the ropes about using a ghost box. And I was skeptical at the first, because I've tried EVPs in the past and not had much success at it. I was more of a debunker than, someone who had any luck at it. But I actually was right soon after John Keel passed away. I thought, what a shame, Keel has passed. And then pretty soon, my friend Brett Oldham, who's an abductee and was showing me the ropes with the ghost box, we were on investigation at haunted sites and, got John Keel twice. And I thought, what are the odds? And also that somebody thought they'd seen Bigfoot in the air and they heard like tree knocks. And so Brett was asking, how about, John Keel, is this Bigfoot? And this voice said monsters. So later I showed Brett, I said, when I first corresponded with John Keel in October 1969, his first letter, he mentioned he was writing an encyclopedia on monsters. That's what he called cryptids. And in that book called Strange Creatures from Time and Space, the very first chapter, it starts out talking about monsters, and then of course he talks about, Mothman, Birdmen, big sea serpents, the whole 9 yards. But yeah, and then I got my own ghost box, and here at the house, I've even got John Keel Brent, and one guy who knew him quite well told me when I sent him a recording, he said, well, actually, that sounds kind of like John Keel to me. So, I mean, you can actually hear first and last name. And I've got him a number of times, not as much as from one time, I think when my wife was kind of aggravated because it seemed like he kept coming through and she was trying to talk to possible, relatives on the other side and told him to wait his turn. So I think he got ticked. But if that was, but it was just, yeah. And no matter where I go, I get, one of Brett's, we ask for who's there to assist as a tech guide. And Brett always had this guy named Bishop. And every time I do a session, I get Bishop and also someone named Philip. So in a way, I mean, I've got my own repeatable experiment there because I've shown others. I say, I ask for who's there and you just listen and you'll hear Bishop, you hear Philip, and usually several times on a session. And, and there's been things like that.
And one of the reasons I brought that up is you actually mentioned that in your book is hearing Keel over the ghost box. Yeah,
and really the very first time was I didn't even catch it. The very first time I did a session, we were at a haunted site over in Fayetteville, Tennessee. We were in the basement of this very old church, and had been a church. Now it's an art center, but it was about 6 months before I played the tape back. I didn't think I got John Keel, but there was a section where Brett had asked, okay, we're about to close the session. Can you, get Joan's brother to say his name? Well, instead of Joan's brother, it's Keel Johnny. I've never heard it that way since, but he always says John Keel now, but Keel Johnny. And then it sounded like an argument. And I had my wife put the headphones on. I said, you hear Keel Johnny, and then there's like an argument. Does that sound like that could be your brother? And she said, yeah, it kind of sounds like my brother. But he said, it sounds like he's maybe saying something that I've not heard him say. I said, well, I think he's saying it now anyway.
Yeah.
But it was, yeah. So, and then, I did a podcast with a couple of individuals who are really into the high strange, and it was it was funny when I brought up the ghost box, because it's ghost box. They seem to think that, well, it's just an AM radio frequency, it's and so I didn't argue with them. It was about time to end the show, but I did write to the main person later, and I said, I'm not sure what your thoughts were on that, because you've experienced so much, and you should know that whether the voice is coming out of thin air or through a radio or a telephone, these things do happen,
Yeah.
But anyway, I know even in the ghost hunting community, some people just don't like
Yeah.
the ghost box, and they think, it's just all pareidolia. But
hmm
sometimes it is. But then you get things that are so loud and clear. No, it's not. But anyway, so well, I'm sorry if I'm talking too much.
No, please. No, I'm enjoying it.
But anyway, well, I know there's a whole lot more to cover, and I'm going to order your book, so I am better informed on all this. And I know it's going to it sounds very fascinating. I know that my friend Angelia Cheer was very, very impressed with the book, as she wrote, I think, a forward to it.
Yeah, she did.
It's unfortunate she passed as soon as she did. I know she certainly had other plans to write another book and such. But anyway, before I guess I need to wind this up, I'd just like to say thank you again. And if there's anything you want to add, perhaps there's something or talk you're going to do, or some other project you got going, or something that you might like to share with people.
Yeah, sure. The Meadow Project is literally a project. It is an ongoing research project. Like I said, we were just there in March. Had some phenomena happen then. We do have various guest researchers from different fields. Had Matthew Delp, who's a cryptid researcher from up in Virginia, is one of our guest researchers. Katie Grabowski, head of MUFON for Arizona, is one of our often guest researchers. I'm going to be speaking on the Meadow Project at the Phoenix MUFON meeting in August. So I just got my plane tickets for that. So I'll be out there presenting some of this, some of our evidence and giving a talk on this. And during these briefings and presentations, I actually show the FLIR footage of the cube and the footage of the Estes session, so people can make up their own mind. I have a day job. I'm doing fine with my day job. I've had a very successful career. So people can take this for what it's worth. I put the information out there for people to digest and make up their own minds. But a closed mind is not a mind that can be made. It's only a mind that can say no. So I ask the people, not only with my experiences, do they keep an open mind with their own experiences. And if anybody's interested in reading the book, it's on ebook. It's also an audio book. It's hardcover, softcover. They're on Amazon, and I just signed a contract, of all things, to have it printed in French. Believe it or not, which is kind of strange, but that's
Awesome.
I don't speak French, but we have a translator working on that. So it's out there. If people are interested in reaching out, if they go to Facebook to Trey Hudson -author, that's where I'm at. And I just appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. It's really cool because, like I said, I read your book on John Keel because I'm a fan of Mr. Keel's work. So this has just been a real treat for me. And thank you.
Okay, well, it's certainly been a treat for me, Trey, and I genuinely appreciate it. Look forward to keeping up with your work, and one day, if it's possible, I might like to come down and try for some EVPs and whatnot down at your site. Maybe Keel will join us.
But maybe so.
So anyway, thank you very much, and you take good care.
Thank you, and have a good evening.